Some music here. Hopefully you all can hear that. Please let me know how the levels are. If there are any drastic problems, it would be good for me to fix now. If there are not any drastic problems, that's also good to know. Turn down the music a smidge. Okay. There. 4%. Is that a smidge? Alright. Well, nobody's complaining other than that, so let's get started. So welcome everyone to the first Kickstarter live stream for the One Deck Dungeon Kickstarter. Thanks to everyone who's been backing and supporting us, leaving comments, all that good stuff. Yeah, we're excited to have this Kickstarter going. One Deck Dungeon is a game that some of us on the team, I know at least John and I, have liked and been playing for a while, so getting to do this project is really exciting for us. And it's also the first game from Handelabra Games that isn't just with Greater Than Games. Although, as you all know by now, there's the special crossover between the two, so making bridges between different groups and having partnerships definitely has its way of mixing and mingling together. Alright, so let us delve into the endless, dangerous dungeon of programming. And specifically, programming One Deck Dungeon. Have I introduced myself? I don't think I have. I'm Jean-Marc Giffin. I've been with Handelabra for 3 years now, since it started doing Sentinels in the Multiverse. I do mostly the rules engine programming, making sure that the game follows all the rules and all the cards and components and stuff interact the way they're supposed to. And I'm not the only one who does that, but I kind of maintain a lot of that work. David does Sentinels now, and I've been doing Bottom of the Ninth earlier this year and One Deck Dungeon now. And I also generally do music for the games, but this game already has a composer, so BeatScribe will be doing the music for this game. Alright. Yeah, I can't necessarily keep an eye on the chat while doing all this, so if you have a specific question, just at Jean of Marc, blah blah blah, and I'll get to it when I can. Alright, so let's start. So the first thing I'd like to do, because some people might be here, some people might have backed the game without really knowing a lot about it, and we thank you for doing that. So let's take a look. This is the prototype that was used in the video, and it's just sort of we put it together specifically for the Kickstarter to make sure we had stuff to show, but there's still a lot of work to be done on it, obviously. Yeah, so basically in the game you select one or two heroes, and the hero has some initial stats to work with. They also have a heroic feat, which is like a special skill that only that hero has, and they have an innate skill, and that changes based on whether there's one or two players. So if it's one, it's usually good for you, and if there's two, it usually helps out your teammate. Also, you can get additional skills along the way, which we'll see. And so at the beginning of the game you have your initial stuff, but as the game goes on you get more and more skills, which gives you more and more options of what you can do. Also at the beginning of the game you select a dungeon. In this case, it's the Dragon's Cave, which is the easiest one in the game. And, oh, reduce the music, okay. There. Alright. And so, basically, the dungeon has an effect, and as you go deeper into the dungeon, more of these effects will happen. So this is floor 1 here, and as you go deeper into the dungeon, you'll go to floor 2, and then floor 3, and then you'll eventually face the boss. The boss isn't part of this prototype. I'll get to what these boxes mean in a second. They don't really make sense until you've actually explored the dungeon a little bit. This is your time. Various things in the game deplete your time, and once your time runs out, you either have to go to the next floor or start taking some damage. And then this is your level. Your level kind of gives you... Well, here, I'll load up a level card here so you can see. So it says how many items you're allowed to carry, which you'll see soon. How many skills you're allowed to have. This is over here. You get a potion for reaching the level, and the potions that you can use are down here. There's a certain amount of them. This prototype doesn't say how many you have, it doesn't look like, but you know, that'll information will be available. You get a bonus die per encounter, and that's how much you need to level up. Alright, so the first thing you need to do is look for rooms. You have to explore a little bit. So we'll just click here, and the torchlight goes, and we get to explore. Alright, so now we have some rooms to enter. Now, of course, right now we don't know which room is which or what is better than others, so you gotta kind of open them and then decide what you're gonna do. Normally you have the choice when you open a door of entering or fleeing, but in the prototype it just kind of goes ahead, so it assumes you want to do it. So we'll just pick one. Whoa, it's the glooping ooze! Alright. Yeah, so that's where it just went ahead. So then you gather your dice. Your dice are based on your stats. So our strength is 4, so we get 4 yellow dice. Our agility is 3, we get 3 agility dice, 2, and then this is an additional one because of our level, which you see right here, 1 bonus die. And this bonus die is wild, so it can be all 3 types at once, basically. Alright, so now in order to defeat the glooping ooze, we need to fill in all these boxes. The color is important. Basically the die that goes there has to be the color that matches it, so blue and blue, yellow and yellow, etc. Black can go anywhere, and it has to be higher than or equal to the number that's in here. There's also a rule that anything with a shield means that that's armor, and you have to get past the enemy's armor before you can actually start dealing damage over here. So let's go ahead and fill that up so I can cover that one, cover that one. And now I've covered the armor boxes, so I'm allowed to access the other ones. And so put that one there, that one there, that one there. Alright. Oh, we've run into a problem here. I only have a 3 left, and that's a 4. Also, this 5, this blue 5 is uncovered right now. So maybe I'll use an ability. So over here, this says pay 1 yellow die and get a strength 6. Okay, so that effectively turns any yellow die into a 6, which would be helpful over here. So I'll go ahead and do that. And put that there. Alright. So now I could cover this over, but I want to show you what the next part does. So let's just say that was a 1, and there's no way to cover it up. These are all agility, and this particular enemy doesn't require, doesn't have any agility. We call these challenge boxes, so it doesn't have any challenge boxes. So I will just go ahead and end the encounter. When you do that, yeah, so you notice that box popped up a little bit, and then you may have noticed this time going down here. It had 2 time icons on it. What that means is that any of the challenge boxes that are not covered, you suffer consequences. Yeah, sorry if the sound effects are too loud. I can't really adjust the volume of that right now, but we won't be playing this for much longer anyway. So any uncovered boxes are the consequences, and that means that for each time icon, you lose a bit of time, and for each of the wounds icon, the hearts, you take some damage. In this case, there was no damage, there was just time. So then you go into what is one of the most strategically important parts of the game, looting. Every card has 3 possibilities of what you can get from it. You can either get an item, and if you grab that, that increases your stat of that kind by 1. So if I grab this, this will turn from a 2 to a 3. That means in future encounters, I get 3 blue dice instead of just 2. I can grab another skill, and that just adds the skill to my skill set, as long as I don't already have it, because you can't have more than 1 of the same skill. Or I could grab 3 XP, and you can see here on the scroll how much XP is required to level up. So once you get to the top, you get to the next level, and that gives you higher stats. So remember how before I said this, so 3 items, that means the amount of items I'm allowed to carry is 3. So I'm only allowed to convert to items 3 times. I'm only allowed to have 3 skills in addition to my innate ones. So these 2 don't count towards that. And so leveling up, you get, I think it's 5 items or something. I don't have it on the screen right now, but so I only have 2 here, and some encounters rely heavily on magic, so I think I'd, in this case, probably go ahead and grab this as an item. And there you go, it's 3. And that's pretty much where this prototype ends. But hopefully that was a good sort of introduction to the game. That's the main game loop. You kind of keep going deeper and deeper into the dungeon. You go down the floors, which makes the game harder as you go along to kind of balance out all the extra stats and things you're getting. And then eventually you fight a boss, but we won't be looking at the boss today. Alright, so what will we be looking at? Alright. Let's see here. Oh, 4 and 4, yeah. Okay, so we will be programming this handsome guy right here, the skeleton. So you saw we have the programming for glooping ooze, but we haven't covered. Actually, most of the cards aren't covered yet. I've mostly been working on like the basic rules of the game, like all the things you can do, but not like a bunch of specific cards. So having this extra one will put us ahead a little bit. And to explain how this is divided into code, I just drew up this little thingy here. I'm not a visual artist, so you know, I know it's not super fancy, but so this is the encounter card as a whole object right here. Because in code, in the code we use C#, it's called object-oriented, and basically everything is broken down into related parts, and those parts contain other parts, and so on. So the encounter card has a challenge inside of it, and that challenge can either be a foe or a peril. In this case, it's just a foe. And then foes can also include an effect, and the effect is sort of separated out from the actual foe, and that's so that if 2 foes have the same effect, they can use the same one without duplicating any of the code. Over here we have the items, so in this case it's 1 agility, and then down here this is either a skill or a potion, and in this case it's a potion. So spend 2 time before an encounter and skip to the claim loop phase. So you might want to use this against a really hard foe or peril that you know you're not going to accomplish very well. So yeah, hopefully this diagram here will kind of help you understand as we break into some code. So let's just put this handsome guy over there. All right. Oh yeah, this was me testing out that the stream worked. This isn't actual code, so I'll just delete that. All right. So the first thing we would like to do is turn this into data. It would be really convenient if we could just take this image file and put it over here and it works, but that's not really the way we have things set up. I'm sure there's a way to make such a program, but that would probably take as long as making the game. Or maybe not, I don't know. I haven't tried it. Anyway, so let's go to the encounter card. Okay. All right. So you'll notice I have some test cards here. Those are just to kind of fill up the deck until real cards are made. So those will eventually be deleted, but for now, I'll let them sit around. Oh. Can you increase the font size? Asked John. There. Is that better? Okay. Let me know if that's good, because, yeah, I guess there's the quality issues. From streaming. Looks fine on my computer, but anyway. Okay. So, yeah, let's make a new encounter card. I'll just copy this stuff here. And basically, this is called JSON. It's just sort of a data markup language thingy. I don't know what the technical term for explaining exactly what it is. I'm sure John does. But basically, it contains a bunch of data about the well, any data you want it to, really. It's kind of like XML. So this means a new object, and the expansion identifier, that just means this is part of the base game. It's not part of one of the expansions, because once we have expansions, we need to know which is which. This is the identifier, so this means, like, this has to be unique in the game. So I'll call this skeleton, but in One Deck Dungeon, there are 2 skeletons, and this part is the same for both skeleton cards, but this part and this part can be different. So I want to uniquely identify that this is the skeleton with the invisibility potion. And then the items that it just has agility, so I'll just go ahead and take that out. And then the foe identifier. Right, so in the diagram, remember this green square area? That means that it needs to know what goes in here. And in this case, we just want skeleton. Because it doesn't... The foe itself doesn't care what these are. And then, if this were a skill, we would put the skill identifier, but in fact, this is a potion. So a potion identifier, invisibility. There's a lot of eyes in there. All right. So basically, that's all the information that we need for the encounter card. Of course, whenever there's an identifier, as there are here, these are going to cross-reference. So foe identifier, so we need to go to the foe list. Why does it keep doing that? Sorry. Alright, so let's see. JSON JavaScript object notation is a lightweight data interchange format. There you go. Alright. Thank you, John. So let's grab some code here. Alright? So this means it's going to look up this skeleton, so we have to put a skeleton entry here. So expansion identifier again, base game, put skeleton there, and it also needs a title. This is what actually appears here. In this case it's the same, but if there were spaces, like if it was, you know, Skeleton King, the identifier doesn't have spaces and the title does. That just gives us a way to keep the code name of it separate from what the player actually sees. So experience points, this one has 2, so we'll put 2 here. Effect, so what effect is here? It has Undying. And so remember how in that diagram this part was green and this part was purple. That means that this is another object within an object, so we'll have to define this one as well. Now there's this whole series of challenge boxes here. Okay, these were taken right from the Glooping Ooze, so they won't be exactly the same, so we have to make them same as they are here. And if I make a mistake, feel free to point it out, because this is sort of the thing that's prone to error, because like it's not going to give me a compile error because I put, you know, strength here when it's supposed to be magic or whatever. Like it doesn't know what it's supposed to be, so you know it's kind of like up to the user to notice these things are wrong. So I try and go slow and just make sure I get it right. Alright, so the first box, the die type is magic, the number is 2, and it is armor. So that one happens to be the same. The next one, the die type is magic, the number is 4 this time, so we'll change that, and it is armor. Okay. Next one, it is strength, the box value is 3, and now we put in the consequences. This one just has 1 time, so we don't have any wounds, so we'll just take that out. The next one is strength 5 with 1 wound and 1 time. Okay, those are already set. The next one is agility, box value 5, and the consequence is 1 wound and 1 time. And finally, the last one is strength 6, and this one has consequence 2 time and no wounds. Okay, I'm looking at the chat to see if anyone's... second magic is 4, not 3. Yeah, I just copy and pasted this from Glooping Ooze. I was, sorry, at this point, if I have made any mistakes, let me know. Okay, and that's actually all we need to do for the skeleton. What we need to do next, though, is it says I use the Undying effect, and I don't think that effect is in the list yet. So we have Hall of Statues, Split, Frost, but we don't have Undying. So let's add an entry here. Identifier name are the same. Effect class type. So basically, like, what this means is that a lot of these effects essentially do something very similar. And I'll take Frost and Split as an example. So Split says, in the body, spend 1 time for each 1 rolled. Frost says before the encounter, spend 3 time. But basically, what I try and do is isolate, well, what's the actual consequence? What's the action that occurs? The action that occurs is spending time. Spend time, spend time. And so rather than individually code everything, I pare it down to an effect class, which says, well, basically what this boils down to is do this. Okay? But then there are some parameters around that. So we need to say the amount of time to spend. In this case, it's 1 for each one. And then this time it's just a flat 3. And then the condition is die values rolled, and then it's if the die combo is 1. So for each one, spend 1 time. And then down here, This is even simpler. Before an encounter, spend 3 time. So then we look at Undying. What's the effect? If any boxes are empty, spend 2 time. Alright, well that's still spending time. So that's why we do this, is because a lot of them are actually doing something similar. They're just slightly different circumstances. So the amount of time for this one is 2 instead of 3, and the condition type would be any boxes empty. Now I don't think this is recognized by the engine yet. Meaning if I try and run this, it'll say, I don't know what this means, and it'll throw an error. But that's actually a good thing, because then it lets me know what needs to be done. If it said it was okay and then just didn't do anything, that would be a little worse, because, you know, then it's not as obvious to me as a programmer that I forgot to do that. And then we'll just fill in the text here. If any boxes are empty, spend time. And you'll notice that we have these little brackety things here. That's because there's no, you know, symbol to do that. And so when we put it into Unity, it'll know to replace those with these icons. But that's just a way to represent it with simple text. Alright, so we've got the foe and the effect taken care of. Let's close and save those. The next one we need is the potion invisibility. So let's go to potion list. Alright. So similar to other things, here's where the potions are stored. So let's copy that. Invisibility. I'm going to type it slow to make sure I don't have any typos, because if this isn't correct, stuff won't work. And then spend time before encounter, skip to the claim loot phase. Alright. Now effect class type. So I thought about just doing spend time and then having some parameters, but this one's kind of an interesting card in that it's not just spending time before an encounter, it's also skipping to a claim loot phase, and that's sort of a different thing altogether. And so this is sort of a unique effect in the game, so I decided to just give it its own class, and I'll just copy there to avoid typos. Doesn't need that or that or that. Alright, so that's the potion. I'm just going to take a look in the chat here, see if I'm missing anything. Okay, don't see any fires. Alright, so back out of there. Alright, so now we've defined both of these. That's cool. Alright, so now we have to tell the engine that this is now like a real, quote-unquote real card. We have to tell it we want this in the game. So we go to constants here, and then we have sort of these ongoing lists of canonical identifiers. This basically says I want this in the game. And the reason I do that is that some items are test items and I don't actually want them in a real game, I just want them for testing. So this is kind of where we store those, and it's also good for looking things up really quickly. So we'll just put that in there, and now we're saying we want skeleton invisibility. Alright, everyone with me so far? Okay. So over here we have unit tests, and these are basically to test that the rules of the game do what they're supposed to do. You know, like a healing potion heals 3 at the start of a turn, or heals 2 any other time, that it stays around for as long as it can be used, that you can't go past the maximum number of potion tokens, which is 6 in the game. Things like that. And so we would like to have a test for this guy. I suspect there'll be errors when we run it, because there's a few things I haven't done yet, but we can at least get going on it. So we'll create a new test. Whoops. Public void skeleton undying. Right. If you don't know what all of this stuff means, you know, I'm not going to go into a full course on programming here. But basically, this is just making a new test and then write code to go along with it. So let's start a new game of One Deck Dungeon. And you'll see in the parameters here that by default, it starts in the Dragon's Cave with just a one-player paladin, no second player, and the initial potion is the healing, and that's because the potion can be different in the expansion, so provide that. And now we have a new game going, so let's just see what that looks like. We'll put this to... There we go. Alright. Okay. So as expected, this failed here, and that's because... I bet it's because there's no effect in the... Right, yeah. So the following JSON object tried to create condition type. Any box is empty, and that's what I mentioned before of... I put in some safety stuff here saying like, I don't know what the heck this is yet. So let's just go make that really quick. Oh, it's really annoying how it resizes every time. Anyway, condition type, any boxes empty. I suspect it will also complain about the invisibility, but I guess we'll see. Oh, I guess I already have that. Let's see. Effect. Yeah, there it is. So I must have already put that in at some point. Cool. Alright, so let's take a look at our game. So, starting a new game of One Deck Dungeon. Entered start of floor. Any start of floor effects occur. The Hall of Statue causes 5 time to be spent. If you remember in the prototype there, that was the effect of the dungeon. So that means right when you start a new floor, 5 time is spent, and that just happened here. Cool. So I have a bunch of helpers. Sorry for doing this, but every time I go somewhere else it resizes for some reason. Maybe if I don't dock it. Maybe if I just go like this. Let's try that. So I have a bunch of helpers to help me like get to the thing I want to test really quickly, but I'm not going to use those for the sake of you guys like seeing what the heck is going on. So the first thing you do is well, let's just go phase by or state by state. So in the game rules it calls everything phases. But in the engine we call them states, and because they're broken down even more than a phase is. And you can kind of think of a state as if I were to close the game and come back into it, where would it reload from? So usually we have it reload from the start of the state, unless something like dice were rolled, where you don't want to let the player like re-roll the dice all the time and get different results. So we enter the next state, and let's see. Should be the start of turn. Yep, start of turn. Spent 2 time because it's the start of turn. And again, I have helpers for all these, but I'm just kind of going through them all step by step so you guys can see what's going on. All right. So choose dungeon option. Activation. An activation is anything that you as the player can interact with. So at this point, the players are choosing whether to explore, open a door, enter an open door, or descend. But there's only one option in this case, explore, because there are no doors yet. So we'll use explore activation. Okay, it deactivates it, and then the heroes explore the dungeon, revealing 4 new doors. I guess I could have put what the doors are in the output. But I didn't. Alright, and if we enter the next state, that would be the end of turn, and then the start of turn, and then go back to the choose dungeon option. Okay, so now I'm going to show you one of the handy things that I do. Instead of just doing enter next state all the time and forgetting where I am, I can just go like this to choose dungeon option. And then it'll know, basically keep entering states until you arrive where we want you to be. Okay. So, heroes are selecting which door to open or enter. Now you'll notice that over here there was the explore activation, and that's not here. And the reason is because you can't have more than 4 doors in the door area, as I call it, in the engine. And there are already 4 doors, so you can't do that. But you can open a door. So use door. What? Right, cards activation. Let's see, open door. There we go. I usually don't have to do this manually, so I forgot what I wrote for that. Okay, we'll just open door 0 and see what it is for now. Okay, we entered the door. The heroes bust open a door, revealing a glooping ooze. And so now you decide whether you want to enter or flee from there. The thing is that this test is supposed to be testing the skeleton, right? So we don't necessarily want to open this random door. So instead of doing all this, I can just go start of encounter and let's see if that works. So basically what this is going to do is cheat the game a little bit. Whenever you explore, it's going to make sure that one of these cards is in the door area, and then that's the door it's also going to open. Normally when you play a game you don't know what they are, and that's good, but for testing you really need to know what's going on. Randomness makes testing stuff frustrating. So let's do that. Alright, so we got some warnings here. Let's take a look at those, and again I put these in so that it reminds me what to do if I haven't done it yet. But let's take a look here. So heroes are selecting which door to open. They open one, and the heroes open a door revealing a skeleton. And this comes from what we had here. So basically we know that we've gotten to the skeleton at this point. Okay, and the heroes are deciding to enter the room and face the skeleton. Okay, so now the engine isn't sure what to do with any boxes empty. I told it this is a thing that we're allowed to use, but I haven't defined it in any meaningful way. So let's go to condition, and basically this is where the code says, like, okay, I'm supposed to spend time at some point, but you have to tell me when that sometime is. Okay? So when this happens, Undying, if any boxes are empty, I asked Chris about this, and he said that this happens right before you suffer consequences. So it's not part of the consequences, and obviously you have to wait until the player has put all their dice before this happens. So basically once they confirm, yes, I'm done, right before it goes into the suffer consequences phase, this happens. Okay? So we will say, right, if the game action is change state, okay, if timing is after, so we need this to happen before. So else, if timing is before, okay, is condition type any box is empty, and change state to state controller is state type state suffer consequences. Big font is using me a little bit. It's hard to read the whole thing at once. I think that's right. Also, I need to tell it that condition type, that this is considered to be a state condition type. Because basically everything in the game is controlled by these game actions, and so basically anytime one of those occur, basically the effect going on has a chance to look at it and see if it cares about it at all. Alright, so let's try running our test again and see what happens. It should at least have these warnings go away. Yep. Okay, so now we're at the start of an encounter and we have a skeleton. That's cool. So now we actually have to do some stuff. Okay? So go to gather our dice, and then we'll roll, go to roll dice, and then we'll use the roll dice activation. Now, just because of the way the system works, the engine actually has to ask the view, that is, it has to ask whoever's playing, the system that's playing the game, for the player, what the dice values are, because there's actually physics involved in all those dice rolling, and it's hard to force. It's harder to force the physics than it is to just let the physics do whatever they do and then tell you what happened. So let's say, but let's just, I have a little convenient thing here to just say like, you know, all the dice roll 5 or something like that. So if we roll this here, there, we gather the dice for the paladin, 3 strength dice, 1 agility die, and 3 magic dice as per her stats. And then when she rolls the dice, she gets 5s all around. I can make it more granular than this, like say this is 1, this is 3, this is whatever, and I have that in other tests, but it's not super important for this test, so I'll just make them all 5s, and that's good enough. And then go to use skills and place dice. Okay, so now as soon as we go to use skills and place dice, all of these boxes activate, meaning you can do something with me now. I'm not just like an image on the screen. And what you'll notice though is that some of them are disabled, and that's these ones here and the dungeon one. And that's because these are armor, so these need to be filled first. So these are not disabled. Just the non-armor ones are disabled. So now we actually have to place the dice, and I have this handy autofill challenge boxes thing because I don't want to manually type everything in all the time, especially when it's not important to the test. And because they're all 5s, that means I know for sure one of them won't be filled, this 6 here. So just run that. Okay, and then it automatically did a bunch of stuff. Okay, so it moved 2 magic dice here 2 of the 5s. And as soon as it did that, all the rest of them became enabled, because now the armor dice are covered. And then it goes ahead and puts strength die here, an agility die here, strength die here, and then 1 on the dungeon itself. So this is the only one that's empty. This strength 6. So normally, if we go to suffer consequences, we would just lose 2 time for that. But because of this effect here, we'll lose another 2 time. I'm not sure if that part will happen yet, but I guess we'll see. I guess it depends how much I've already coded. Sometimes I forget. Oh, right. So I have to use the continue to say that I'm done. So, so this is the normal stuff that would happen. Go to suffer consequences. Heroes suffer 0 wounds and 2 time from uncovered challenge boxes. That's this one. But then we also notice a little indicator here. Undying causes 2 time to be spent, and that happens right before we suffer consequences, which is exactly what we want. So that looks like it's good. Now I know this isn't very interesting, you know, from an onlooker's perspective, because it's just all text and it's like, well, all you did was output a string. But these strings all have meaning. I don't just like willy-nilly say print out a bunch of stuff. Like, if it prints this out, that means it's actually happening in the engine. And when you're playing the game in its proper form, that it will tell the game, okay, this is happening, do this now. And then it'll show it to the player. And that showing it to the player part is the side of the code that I don't really do much of. That's more of John's domain in general, and Jennifer. So you can look forward to that in the future. But yeah, so it looks like this works. So skeleton invisibility, undying, empty boxes. Because one possibility is that there are empty boxes, and then the other possibility, of course, is that there aren't any. So in this particular case, it is. Right? Yeah, so you are the UI guy then, Jean-Marc. So that's the part I don't do. I do the rules engine stuff, and the UI is covered by John and Jennifer mostly. I once in a while go into the UI, but you know, doing the engine is not usually, up until now at least, it's always been enough work that having 1 or even 2 people dedicated to that makes sense. Alright, so that worked well, and then we'd want another test to make sure that if there aren't empty boxes, that this does not happen. Oh yeah, I need to assert stuff. I was pointing it out to you guys, but the test doesn't actually know for sure that this happened. So I have this quick time storage. This means keep track of what the time is right now, and then go to suffer consequences, and then the time should have gone down by 4. Now I haven't been good at putting comments in here because I've just been saying everything out loud. So I'll go ahead and do that now before I forget. Okay. And then I'll, oh, right, I just copied that. Let's see. No empty boxes. Okay. Right, so that one worked. And then, and so next we do the situation where there are no empty boxes. And in that case, it should just be 0. So, now, because of the extra dungeon box, which isn't on the screen here, the paladin doesn't actually start out with enough strength to cover all the boxes, even if she rolls all 6s. So there are 2 things I can do. I can either have the test cheat and just give her a strength item right from the start, which I'll do if it's a complicated thing. But if it's just a simple thing like having her go through one encounter and getting an additional strength, then I may as well just do that. So I can just go to end of next encounter, get a glooping ooze with the skill, which I happen to know in this case has a strength. All dice are 6. Claim loot. Now this is where I'm just like skipping a whole whack of stuff, because this isn't like, this is only important so that I get the extra strength. It's not important in terms of knowing the insides of what all this is doing, because I have other tests that are testing all that stuff manually. So once I have a manual test checking everything is good, then I do sort of the quick escapes. So let's see, assert, hero strength, should be 3 before this, and 4 afterwards. Right, and then go to use. So this time we will roll all 6s to make sure that this one can be filled as well. I think that's all what I need to find there. We'll autofill the challenge boxes, use the continue. I guess I could combine these into one thing, but anyway. Alright, let's see if it at least makes it... Oh, right, the hero. Alright. Let's see if it at least makes it this far. Oh, that was the other one. This one. Okay. So yeah, so you'll notice it does a whole whack of things here for me, which is nice, because having to type all that in manually each time would just take forever and not be very productive. But the important part is right here. Moved the card Glooping Ooze to Paladin's items, and Paladin gains Glooping Item as an item gaining strength and health. And that's why here, after this happens, the hero now has a strength of 4. Okay? So now when we go to visit the gentlemanly skeleton here, we can cover all the boxes, and then we enter suffering consequences. Paladin took 0 wounds, and hero suffers 0 wounds 0 time from uncovered challenge boxes. Now what you'll notice here is undying still causes 2 time to be spent. And this is why writing these tests is important, is because it worked here perfectly fine. So to just stop there and move on with new code isn't a good idea, because there might be bugs, and that's why it's good to at least test the obvious cases and then sort of test the non-obvious stuff sort of as it comes up or as you think of it or whatever. Okay, but the thing is this test didn't fail, and the reason is because we didn't put in the asserts. So quick time check storage. Okay. and then quick time check 0, right? So what should happen is that no time passes at all, because no boxes are empty, so this shouldn't happen, and all the boxes are covered, so there's no consequences. So now if I run it, it should fail. Yeah, and that red means it's failed. And then we can look over here to see why. Oh, that's not what I expected. So right there, sometimes there's a failure from a random thing. I'll have to deal with that later, but I don't want it to interfere with what we're looking at right now, so I'll look at it after the stream probably. Expected time to have changed by 0, but it was changed by 2. And then if you look at the output, yeah, you can see Undying causes 2 time to be spent. Okay, so, you know, but this is good because it points out that there's a problem here. So if we go back to condition and look at this a little closer, all we've really done is if the condition is any box is empty, and we're going to the suffer consequences state, we're saying, yep, you meet the condition. But that's not true because we haven't checked if all the boxes are empty or not. So, active challenge boxes. This checks all the challenge boxes that are relevant. Because, you know, there are challenge boxes, you know, all over the place in the deck, but those don't matter right now. So we have active challenge boxes that we're looking. So then we ask, are any of the active challenge boxes what? So we can check if it's fully covered. Can't check if it's empty, but that's okay, because if there are any that are not fully covered, then that means if any challenge boxes are empty. So if they're not fully covered, if they're not all fully covered, i.e. there are any that are empty, then we return true. And then so otherwise it'll just return false. So let's try this again. So first make sure the one that we had before still works. Oh, yeah, so this is the same thing as before. I think what's happening here, oh yeah, okay, I know what's happening. So basically what's happening is that we only have one of these skeletons in the deck, and when it spends the 7 time at the start here, it gets rid of the skeleton, so it can't put it as an explorer. So we just basically say, alright, in this case you're allowed to take it from the discard, which of course in the real game would be cheating, but the tests have to cheat sometimes to work reliably. Let's see. Okay, so we broke the original one. I must have written something wrong here. Any of them are empty. Oh. That not should actually go here. If any of them are not fully covered, not if not any of them are fully covered. Negatives are tricky. Just kidding. Multiple negatives can get tricky. There we go. Alright, that one passes, so that's the original test we had. And then no empty boxes. Cool. So now it's not showing up when we don't want it. So when there's no empty boxes, no time is spent. When there are empty boxes, time is spent. And then we run all of my tests just to make sure I haven't broken anything in doing that. The code we wrote hasn't really touched much outside of what we needed it to, so I don't, generally expect any problems. And indeed, there aren't any. 60 passed tests and 0 failures, so that's good. All right. So, that is the bulk of that. What time is it now? 3. So we've been exactly an hour. I guess I could go ahead and program this invisibility as well, and then that way we have the whole card worked out. And actually, I'm going to take invisibility. I might take that off later. We'll see. It doesn't really matter which skeleton it is in this case, because it'll have the same challenge boxes and the same effect, but we'll see. Maybe it will be. And actually, this is a test for potions, not the foe itself. Bunch of stuff here. Right, so what are we testing? We're testing invisibility. Right, well I guess we're just basically testing that the potion does what it's supposed to do. Okay, so we start a new game. So what we want to do is get to a situation where we claim the skeleton as loot. So go to next end of encounter. So we'll assume that things go well. Claim loot type. Right, so before we decided to take it as an item, we can also take it as experience, but that's not relevant to this test. In this case, we want to take the skeleton invisibility as a skill or potion. It can't be both, at least not in the base game. Maybe there'll be an expansion, but we'll see. So, insert potion identified invisibility. Let's just make sure that much works. Okay, so it gets all the way to the end. It takes this and heroes identified a new potion invisibility. So that's good. First get the invisibility potion. In the next encounter, use the invisibility potion to skip to the claim loot state and spend 2 time. Okay. So first thing we do is it says on the card, it says spend 2 time before an encounter, right? So we shouldn't assert potion activation. So the invisibility potion, unlike the healing one, should not be activated yet. That means you shouldn't be able to use it when you're just at the end of an encounter. However, if we go to next before encounter, I don't know, I guess Glooping Ooze. Sure, Glooping Ooze. Maybe I should just have this to always be true to avoid not. Anyway. So we go to a Glooping Ooze encounter, and we're in the before encounter state. Assert state. Okay. What have I done? Alright. Okay, we're here, and now we want to assert that this activation is available, i.e. as soon as you enter this, the potion excuse me, I might need some water, does become available. Now this won't happen yet because we haven't actually coded it, but one thing I often do is write a test up until it fails, because then I know for sure that like it's not doing the thing I expect it to, and then I know once I do the code and it does pass that something good has changed. Right. So we go before encounter, and there's no invisibility potion. So let's take a look. If we go back to our potion list here, we have invisibility, and it uses the effect class type invisibility. So yeah, so part of the problem is this has no code. It doesn't know what to do. It just sits there empty. So we go to effects, and I already have an empty controller here because otherwise the game won't even run really. So basically here's where I have to like put in some logic for this thing. So the first thing I do is tell it when it can be activated. That means like basically like this is checked every once in a while to see, is this a situation in which the invisibility potion can be activated. Now activated doesn't mean that it's used, it just means that it's available for the player. I notice I haven't looked at the chat for a little bit, so I'm just going to look just in case I'm missing some questions or anything. Okay, so I don't see any ats to me, so that's I'll take that as to me. There's no questions right now. Alright, so can be activated now. Invisibility is activated before an encounter. So if the current state is before an encounter, return true. Whoops. Sometimes autocomplete doesn't do what you expect it to do. Otherwise, return false. So let's run this now, and we might see a difference. Bing! It turned green. So that means it, it wasn't activated before, and then right here, activation. Use a potion. Spend 2 time before an encounter. Claim loot phase. Cool. All right. So then, if we actually use the potion. A few things should happen. So we should use up a potion token, and 2 times should have been spent. So storage. And then when we enter the next state, we should be in the claim loot phase. Okay. Now I don't expect this to work, and if it does, then some miracle has happened because I haven't coded this yet. But again, run it, find that it fails at a particular point, and then do the changes. So expected time to have changed by -2, but it was changed by 0. So now we go back to invisibility effect. And I would perhaps do this all in one go here, but normally, for the sake of, making it easier to follow, I didn't. So override, do effect. So this is where something actually happens when you use the potion. Because remember, a potion just has an effect. It's basically just like a container for this effect and it says I need a potion token to be used. So this is actually an effect. It doesn't mention the potion anywhere here, but that's because the potion contains the effect. Just like the challenge here contained this effect. And what's interesting about that is we probably won't end up doing this, but if we wanted a foe to have this effect for some reason, it could. We could just say the effect of this foe is invisibility, and so as soon as you go to start the encounter, it just spends 2 time and skips right to the claim loot phase. Obviously that'd be a weird design choice, but the fact that, you know, it's flexible enough to do something like that is kind of neat, and does actually come in handy in certain situations. Alright, so do effect. So first spend 2 time, and then why are we spending time? Because of an effect. And then skip to the claim loot state. Again, in the engine here we call them states, even though this says phase. These are just comments, and I usually make the comments so that they make sense within what we're doing. So set next state, claim loot. Okay. Pretty clean code, which I like. And then we just run this. Bing! Alright, so let's take a look. So use the potion here. Invisibility causes 2 time to be spent. The heroes use the invisibility potion. Now you might be wondering why this ordering thing is here, and that's just because this doesn't get output until after all its effects have occurred. Really, the view can do things in any order that it wants to. This just happens to be the order that my test outputs it. And then entered. So then we went to the next state, as we see here, and all of a sudden we're in the claim loot phase. And then I guess we can just go ahead and claim the loot just to you know, verify that it does what it's supposed to. Like basically that we're here and we can use it like normal. Assert current experience points. I happen to know that this glooping ooze is worth 3. Cool. So use the activation, move the glooping ooze card to the level 1's experience points, and the heroes gain 3 experience points as a result. Cool. So we have completely coded this card. It is now in the engine. It has tests. There might be a few more tests to write. But that is basically it. Obviously there's going to be a lot more to do, and this is just one card, and it went a little slower than usual just because I was explaining everything, but that is perfectly fine because I'm happy to explain all that. And let me see if there's anything written in the comments here. If you have any final questions now would be a good time to write it out. Let's see. I think the coding will get more complicated when adding the campaign stuff. Yeah, obviously any number, like the more layers of logic you add to something, the more complicated it becomes. And that's one of the advantages of sort of testing each little thing, is because you make sure that the one thing does what it's supposed to, and then, you know, eventually you might have to write some tests that make sure that a couple of different things work, you know, in the right order or in the right way or whatever. But I think overall, most of the campaign stuff is just going to be additional effects, and so and some of them I would already have programmed by the time I get to campaign. Campaign's probably one of the last things I'll get to in terms of programming. 1 card out of 44. Well, thankfully there's like 2 of each card. So there's like 2 skeletons, and they all have the exact same this area, and then they'll have different skills or potions, but I think there's about 2 of each of those. And so like they're just kind of mixed and matched in different ways. So basically it's like half as much work as it looks like, which is nice. So it's more like, yeah, 22 cards and then 22 skills and potions, I think. I don't know, I'm not sure about this part, but I'm pretty sure the cards are 2 of each. As someone who's often had to figure out other people's sloppy work, I really appreciate how nice and clean your code is. Yeah, thank you. I mean, yeah, one of the things I've always aimed for in code is that it's human readable. Like, yeah, a computer is doing all the work under the hood, so to speak. But I mean, like, a human is looking at it, a human is coding it, a human is modifying it. It needs to make sense. And so, I'm okay with super long method names if it clarifies what it's going to do. A certain number of potion tokens available. I could have had some sort of shorthand, like A is for assert, Poto is potion tokens, but like honestly, like who but me would know what that is, and even in a year will I remember what that is. And then just adding a little comment before a chunk of code to say, in the next, however many lines of code, a paragraph of code or whatever, this is what I'm trying to attempt. And, you kind of break that down as much as you need to. Here I put one in front of each of them, just so that it's like, okay, yeah, here's what the code is, but here's what's actually like the intention is from the card. Let's see. Verbosity is your friend. It certainly can be in certain cases if it makes things clearer. Will you be porting the engine to the TI-89? Would make a great calculator game. Maybe that's a stretch goal. I have to admit, I didn't consider it. A human will have to expand and modify it later, which is the part people tend to forget. Yeah, I try not to forget that. Also, I'm writing the engine code pretty much exclusively, but John has to interface with it. And basically what that means is like, he doesn't have to look at all the code, but he has to like make sense of the things, like when the view gets heal damage action, like he should immediately kind of have an idea as to what that action is supposed to do. Let's see, heal damage action, hero being healed, amount. Oh, okay, so my guess is when I get this, a hero is being healed. He can look in here and see, like, remove wounds from the hero. Okay, yeah, this is pretty much doing what I expected it to do. So yeah, I divide, basically any changes in the game are actions. And so that makes it easy to see, like, basically nothing in the game should really change without an action, if it ever matters to the player in any way. Activations are anything that the player will actually interact with. So challenge box is when they're putting the dice on them. Claiming loot is when they're deciding which loot to grab. Continue just means like, I'm done doing everything, so move on, please. Things like that. Dungeons have... they don't each have their own controller because they don't need to. but I've divided them between the dungeon, the floor, and the boss. Encounters, so the base is the challenge. Encounter has a challenge, and then that challenge can be a foe, a peril, and a peril has peril options. Might be going into too granular detail here, but you know, like, it's a matter of keeping things well encapsulated so that when you see them, you kind of know what they are and what they relate to and how they fit into the system as a whole. Love seeing the text-only representation for the tests. I know this wouldn't be very exciting to a lot of people, but for me, even just seeing the text of the thing that I expected and wanted to happen happened at the right time is something I really enjoy about making the engine, actually. You know, like, I don't need a fancy animation or anything. I just see that text and I'm like, yeah, okay, it's working. And then I know that you know, when it comes time to actually make a view, it's going to do what it's supposed to do. Your engine API is very clear. Well done. Oh, thank you. Empowering John for the future. That's accurate. Who else is playing Isaac? Not right now. Helping the future to save the past. Are foes going to be changed to encounter or stay as foes for the digital? Well, foes are encounters. I mean, encounters can be either a foe or a peril. So I'm not really sure I understand. I don't know. Did I answer the question? Yeah, if you want to know any more details on that, maybe if you rephrase your question a little bit, I'll be able to answer that. Foe is just shortened for what you fight. Oh, I see, right, because you're used to the idea of combat. Right. So the reason, I separated those is because boss battles are also combat. So I needed some way to distinguish the combat cards that are not bosses from those that are. So I call them foe. But one thing to keep in mind, though, is that whatever I write here in the engine, like, has no necessarily bearing on what the user will see when they're actually playing it. Usually we try and keep words the same, but sometimes to keep things consistent or whatever, we have to make a change in a name, you know, just to make it some distinguishable in the engine. Yeah, so I mean, as far as the player is concerned, they'll never have to. They may never even see the word foe. They'll see it as the way it is when you play on the tabletop. So, all right. Any more questions before we wrap up here? You guys are asking some good questions. I appreciate everyone coming out on a Wednesday afternoon to watch another person program. Yeah, hopefully this, for those of you who are interested in this kind of thing, it was, well, interesting. And for those of you who weren't, maybe it at least helped you learn what programmers do. Because I know to some people it just looks like voodoo, and like, I understand what these words mean, but I don't know what is going on. Like, why is it the syntax or whatever. So it's hard for me to look at code the way somebody who doesn't program does at this point, just because I understand what's going on. But I guess there are other programming language. I guess if I looked at assembly code, I've only done something with that once, so I'd probably be pretty lost pretty quickly, unless I did a refresher. Wonder how many rulebooks could be improved if they're revisited after a digital engine has been designed. I'm going to read that again. I wonder how many rulebooks could be improved if they're revisited after a digital engine has been designed. That's a significant statement, because there's a lot of filling in the blanks that humans can do when they read rules. You know, humans have the ability to read between the lines, so to speak, or, you know, interpret something. Sometimes interpret it wrong, but like at least in a way that makes sense to them when they're playing the game, enough that they can play it. But when it comes to writing an engine, like, you know, everything has to be a digital engine, I should say. Everything has to be very precise, and like there can't be any ambiguity in the rule, or like we don't want to leave anything up to the player to decide when they're not supposed to. So we often come back to the designers with a bunch of clarification questions, and they're like, I've never been asked that before, because, you know, most of the time people just do whatever they're gonna do, or whatever. So yeah, hopefully it's helpful for the designer as well, and maybe they won't write a whole new rule book, but at least for future projects they'll keep those in mind. Thank you, you're welcome to the people. Let's see, I like learning new stuff. Me too. We'll go back to the KS now, okay? I have no idea what's going on code-wise, but it looks cool. Well, that's good, because to a lot of people, programming does not look cool at all. So I'm glad you like it. After Christopher has to make a call as to new villains are added to SO2 digital. Yeah, Christopher actually made a change when he was designing Oblivion to a card, specifically because he knew we would have to program it, and that it would be very that it would be problematic in the engine. Specifically with Sentinels, anything that can happen at any time is problematic. You know, you might be able to think, oh, well, you just make a little button that it's like, no, I'm sorry, it's problematic, because Sentinels hasn't worked that way since the beginning. You know, it always happens at particular moments, not at any time. You can just do this thing. Let's see, $25 away from 90%. Yeah, yeah, we're almost there. So, great job, everyone. Thanks for getting the word out. We've got a lot of social help from everybody. Yeah, part of the beauty of tons of players is that I've already had to answer weird edge cases. Yeah, we get a lot of questions too about the game, and it's like, oh, we should ask Christopher about that, because we don't know. Thankfully, I feel like, so far at least, the amount of questions I've had to ask Chris about One Deck Dungeon have already been, either they've been clarified in a new edition, or they've been answered in a frequently asked questions. So yeah, I think in terms of clarity, One Deck Dungeon's really good. All right. So So yeah, I think I'm gonna wrap it up now. It's been an hour and a half. Thanks to everybody who came out. There will be a lot more streams. I think there's one every Wednesday for as long as the Kickstarter is going on. I don't know if I'll be around for any of the future ones. I'll be in the chat at least. But yeah, I'm thankful for everyone who came out. Everyone watching on YouTube now, later. And I will keep plugging away on this until you guys have a fun, playable game. Alright, thanks a lot everybody. Bye.